everybody, and welcome to another On the Workbench session. This time we got some Song of Ice and Fire in the form of Shaggy Dog. So you can see his reference picture on the left-hand side. This is the newest doggy that's coming out in the Stark Heroes 2 box, and I think that's going to be, well, released on May 23rd, depending on when you see this video. So here is his little buddy that goes with him. That's, I believe, Rick Holmes Stark. So when you have him, you get the wolf, and he's also part of the Stark Heroes set. And we've done almost all of them. Now, what I'll do is I'll show you some just quick little pictures here on how this little base was made right here. So let's take you over there right now, and you can see there's some bark, some branches. Those are actually dried tea leaves there. I know you can't see my cursor moving around. Those body parts there, those are actually from Secret Weapon miniatures. They have skulls, the body parts, there's feet, hands, arms, heads, torsos, all kinds of fun stuff. You can see how that meshes in with the movement tray there. And I'm going to give you a little closer look at some of the little rocks, the tea leaves, some of the oxide paste that we use. There's the branch that's sitting on here, and the whole idea of the branch is so that we can do some icicles hanging off of that, because that's really nifty. And with the wolves, there's plenty of room for it. This is kind of a huge movement tray for such a small thing. And there's another view of the body parts right there in place. And you can see I just try to carry the body out onto the movement tray there. And it works pretty nifty for other regular miniatures. So you can see they're all pretty cohesive there. That's all your Starks there. Now, we're going to do this a little bit like we did the Ghost tutorial here. So instead of painting white, well, this time we're going to be painting black. And you can see as we scroll through this, there's your finished doggy right there. So a few tufts in there too. We're also going to do the snow. That's the Secret Weapon crushed glass snow that you see me do on all the miniatures. And in this case, it's going to be a little extra fun because we've got this body sitting here, which means we can mess around once again with some of these blood effects where the snow, basically the crystalline nature of the Secret Weapon crushed glass, lets that blood sort of seep down into the snow, which is kind of what it does with real snow. So that's going to be a lot of fun. Color-wise, it's going to be pretty simple. We're going to use an awful lot of these liner paints. These are from Reaper Miniatures. You got sepia, brown, gray, blue. There's even a red liner. So we'll play around with those. There's even a green liner. Not sure if we'll use that. These are the two off-whites that we use all the time. This one, just sort of a pinkish off-white. That one's a little bit more of a bluish off-white. We'll see which of these things we get to. Now, if you're wondering what it's been primed with, a few different colors of Badger Stino Res Primer. I love this stuff. If you have an airbrush, you can airbrush it on, and it gives you this little bit of pre-shaded look right here. You can brush this stuff on, though. I mean, good grief, we brushed this on for years before we ever got an airbrush, and it works really good for that. And it's for the price and coverage, well, you can't beat it. Now, a couple of the other things that we're going to be using. We've got our craft brushes here. These are the number 8 round craft brushes, the legendary craft brushes. And here's one of the nifty things. So these brushes start to get a little more worn down. You can see I have a different type of a tip here now. So this is more like a filbert brush, except almost 2.5 times as long as a filbert brush. However, when you do this, oh, look at that. That point is almost sharper than the brand new pristine one. These hold an awful lot of liquid, and that's going to be really important at these early stages. And here you go. You can see they are pretty economical. There's 12 of them in here. Get these from Hobby Lobby, either online or in the stores. Now there's also, this is the name of the company that makes these. So Treehouse Studio, you see they're located in OKC. So maybe at some point I'll try and get these from them directly. So just kind of cut out the middleman there and have more direct access to those. Last but not least, we got some makeup sponges here. I got two different types. So we've got these more of a general face sponge, and these are, I believe, for not eyeliner, eyeshadow or something like that. Not real expert on all that stuff, but these will be really handy, especially in those early stages when we're going to be putting glazes down, taking some of it away. Now we're going to begin with the initial shaded base coat phase, and I think I've actually got an example here of just some figures with the initial glazes that have been put on. So let's see if we can find one here. Yeah, looks like, yeah. Where are you guys? Ah, here we go. So here's one. So this is just the original primer like this, but then tinted with some browns and some sepias. And that's what we're going to do in our opening stage right here. So what we're going to do is get all these liner paints out on the palette. We're just going to use water, no, mediums or drying retarders or any of that kind of stuff. Just plain old water, some liner paints, and we're good to go. So I'll be right back with that shaded base coat next. So we've got some paint out on the palette here in the form of mostly our liners. Gray liner, blue liner, brown liner, red, sepia liner. We got our two off-whites out here, and we'll work with those a little bit later on in the process. Now, what you can also do here, this is not a wet palette, by the way, it's just a piece of palette paper. Get that in pad form at, oh good grief, any art store. I'm just going to throw a little drop of water here. In early stages like this, we use an awful lot of water. It just takes a little less time having it out here. Good enough. And we're going to start out with, it's going to hit our base a little bit here. So there's some brown liner here. See, we'll get some water in there. I'm going to make sure I have some sepia liner ready to go too, even some red liner. What we'll do is just work our way around. And the idea is just to, it partially tints this a different color, because you'll see this when we go in with some of the sepia liner. See how that tints it a little bit more of a yellowish versus that gray. It almost becomes, I don't want to say imperceptible at a certain point, but it's definitely less noticeable, especially when we cover it up with snow. That's why I'm just trying to do this to get that little bit of color variety in there, instead of screwing around with trying to paint this whole base only to cover a lot of it with snow and blood effects. Just, it seems like I can save myself a whole bunch of time. So here, let's just keep going here. This is some of the brown liner. And what we'll do is we'll throw down these washes and glazes on here, and then we'll move over to our movement tray and hit that too. So just going right along here. And for those of you that just haven't seen too many of these videos before, you can check out the rest of them on the YouTube channel. There's, well, at this point, close to a couple hundred. Now, some of those are patron videos, which means you sign up for the Patreon page, you get a little extra content here than just, say, the standard YouTube fare, which is available to everybody. And you'll see an awful lot of Song of Ice and Fire stuff. And later on, I'll bring out some things. I don't want to take time to do that right now. Here we're going to actually go with a little more of the red liner on our torso here. Even a little bit on the arm. Remember, we got those sponges. That's what these are for. And you see, we just take some of that away. We're not removing it all the way back down to primer. You can see some of it comes off. Now the nice thing is you can even cut these things with a scissors. And now we've got a little different sized sponge that lets us get down into some of these little crevices without ripping off our tree branch. Like I said, this is just tree bark, and I've got tons of tutorials on this. Every army painting series always begins with basing, and I've got already, 2 Song of Ice and Fire units that have been part of the army painting series, so I show the basing process on them. And then there's other ones, just single one-off episodes. I'm doing another one on cave dwellers, so there's plenty of different basing things that you can check out. So we got this pretty much ready to go. Now let's mess with Shaggy Dog himself. So this is the gray liner. And got a little bit of that blue liner we're going to get ready, but we'll start off with some gray. And we're going to start off on the back of the fur here and then work our way down. We're doing essentially a watercolor type wash here. Might as well let gravity work with us instead of trying to fight against it. That means starting at the top, and this way you can sort of pull that glaze further down. And I can get a little bit of red in there. What the heck? The idea is just to get as much variety as possible. Is it going to end up being red in the final scheme of things? Oh, not really. But just having that little bit in the background like that, as you put your other colors over the top, it's something that you can use as that all-important underpainting. Now I'm just trying to, speaking of underpainting, I'm trying to get at the undersides here. So if you see me, what looks like painting nothing, all I'm trying to do is just get at the undersides. Now you could paint this thing separate from the base itself. It's actually just works out logistically a little bit easier in terms of the videos and just in terms of time. Now watch what happens when we take some of this away. You can see how we already started. We got this turn here. Didn't have to fight it, didn't have to work so hard. It's obviously going to be darker than that. He's essentially a black dog, black wolf, whatever. But now there's a little bit of shading that we can work with. So what we'll do is we'll set that aside. Let's grab our movement tray here, which has the same bark and branch on it. All the same. Now sometimes the tea leaves will come off. It's not really a big deal. Like I said, a whole bunch of this is just going to be covered with snow anyways. And speaking of which, that is why I used more of the, say, the brown liner on here as opposed to the gray, because we're putting that snow on there. We want it to look kind of icy cold, right? And what's better way to make that look more cold than if we've got some kind of warmer colors underneath it. So I'm going to throw out a little more of the brown liner. You can go through it a little bit quicker sometimes, especially in these early stages. But don't sweat the details at this point. It's not that big a deal. Now I'm going to get my red liner again over here because we got the other some more body parts there. Yes, obviously I'm focusing on just making this stuff darker, but also giving it just that little hint of color. Continue with the brown liner. I could probably use some more sepia liner too. I'm going to throw some out there just for the heck of it because I'll probably need it anyway. So I talked about wet palette earlier. You can see why I don't necessarily need a wet palette. This is plenty wet already. It's, like I said, it's working very much in that watercolor style. See, and then just look what happens as I put the sepia liner into some of that wet brown liner. It almost starts to look a little bit like mud. Now you could also use some of those crackle paints. I'm starting to experiment with those more. I've done some bases with those and it's a nifty result. So I might on some figures try to do some of that. I'm not quite sure. So much of my basing for Song of Ice and Fire is just a lot of snow and rocks. As soon as you start getting the crack through there, that suggests something that's a little bit drier, a little bit warmer. So that's probably why I'm not gonna dive too much into the whole crack through thing. So that's the gray liner. Well, actually, before I do that, I'm gonna do some of this to just remove. Look at how much is coming off. So I'm gonna remove some of that here, like so. And again, if some of the rocks or if some of the, as long as the bark doesn't come flying off, that's really the big thing you're wondering about there is that bark going to be stable? And of course it is, because it's super glued to the movement tray. It's not going anywhere. So we're good to go there. Now I'm going to throw out a little gray liner. I sort of need that too, because we'll be using that on Shaggy Dog himself. Lately, instead of putting black around the edges of the movement tray, I'm doing the gray liner, and it's a little less harsh, I would say, than the straight up black. Now, I believe, I think I already magnetized. Yep, it's already magnetized. Now, I use, in general, with the infantry, there's a smaller magnet that goes onto the figure, but in the case of these solos, like the giants, the mountain, the dogs, they get a 10 millimeter by 2 millimeter magnet. And all of a sudden now, see, it doesn't look quite so dark next to the gray liner right there. So that's all set. We can put that off to the side. Not going to fool around with it right now, because this is now definitely dry enough to work on. So you can see the dramatic angle that doing the tree bark gave me there. Instead of him just sort of crouching down on this gigantic base, it looks like he's part of something now. I just can't always find the right words to describe what it does, but this really is going to create a whole environment around him, like a little diorama, basically. Really cool. So I'm mixing in a little bit of the sepia liner, yeah, with the gray. And I'm just going to get some of the underside here. And just reinforce a few of the darks here. Now, like I said, we don't want to get too involved with painting some of these lighter colors, but let's get into that now. So that's some of the maiden flesh you saw there. What we can do is mix it in some of this other color that's already sitting here. Let's warm that up just a touch. And just look at that, look at what that brush is doing. See how wide that brush is? That's really handy, because when it comes to, oh look, going over our rocks here, now we've got ourselves, like I was telling you about, that filbert style brush. Now I'm going to go the other way here. That's a little bit of the maggot white. Again, brush sort of in a filbert mode. You can see there's plenty of paint on there. It's not a dry brush. If you do these feathered brush strokes, you get some of the advantages maybe of a dry brush, where you're picking up these edges right here, these exposed edges. That's great. But you don't get that, all I can call it is a graininess. That tends to happen with the dry brush type stuff. It gets a little bit grainy. And with this, see that? Look, you can see how the paint is loaded in there. And oh look, we can even, we're practically wet blending here. So you can't really wet blend with a dry brush. That's not going to work too well. But what you can do is, see how I got this brush held real gentle like this. You have a loose grip on the brush, and you just stroll down right across these rocks. Now, what I will do is I'm going to take a little bit of my red liner, a little bit of that maiden flesh, and let's get into our torso a bit here. Now, how long do we want this thing to be sitting here? I don't think it would be sitting there a long time. It'd be sort of a fresher kill, so we won't have it be too greenish. It'll be maybe a wee bit pale from loss of blood, perhaps. I'm just going to throw that out there. And that's why we're mixing the red liner in with the Maiden Flash, because it's going to give it a little bit of a cool down, pale. It's also, well, it's kind of cold too. So that combination of, well, no blood and cold might lead to some alterations in the typical normal skin tone. We'll get some greens in there too. Don't worry about that. But we just want to get that a little bit lighter, and we want to make sure that it has that touch of redness to it, but not necessarily pink. And you could, this is not any kind of a final coat here. This is what I mean by shaded base coat. You see we're doing all kinds of shading here, but really it's nothing more than a base coat. I had to call it something, and that just seemed to make the most sense. So we're just going to get a little bit lighter in some areas here. Once again, we got that nice filbert brush. You can see we're just drawing the brush along here. Real nice, real easy. Picking up a couple of these rocks, and at a certain point here, I can't forget about our movement tray. So let's do that, and see, we're just look at how that stuff is settled down into those crevices, starting to dry. And that's the great thing about the liner paints, is because they dry really nice and matte, nice and flat. You don't have to worry about glossiness or any crazy stuff like that. So let's get in. I know there's a little bit of reflection from the center of the tray, but we're going to get into here. So we're going to do some nice light touches on our rocks here. So see what I'm doing? I'm just kind of dragging this almost sideways. Now this almost becomes, almost a 5/8 inch brush instead of a number 8 round. That's the cool thing about these. I always call them my Swiss Army brushes, because they do so many things. It's one tool that becomes many tools. When these things start to get really worn down, I actually use them for putting glue and oxide paste on bases. After a while, what I'll do is just cut down the bristles a certain point of the way. I use it as a spatter brush for mud effects or whatever. I use it for, well, you can spatter blood with it too. Would you want to use your brand new Winsor Newton Series 7 for that? Or maybe a well-used 35-cent brush. It's up to you, but my vote's for the beat-up craft brush. Now let's say you wanted to add a slightly different, you could add some red into the mix, something like that. So let's see if we can find. Here, I'll just throw in, this is just a rusty color here. Any color that looks like rust. Don't get caught up in the names of colors in a super particular thing. The liner paints are special because there's a different formulation there. That's why I use those. So this gives it a little bit of a reddish tint now. And we'll just throw some of that in there. So now we get one more additional coloration here in our dirt/mud. And that's important when you got, gosh, I hate using the term limited palette, or I think I've been saying compressed palette, because as soon as you say limited palette, people think, oh, I can only use a couple colors. Well, yeah, you're not using a ton of colors, as in jars of paint, but you're mixing, or you can create a whole bunch of colors. Look at that. So now we've got ourselves some pretty nifty, couple different nifty mud tones in there. We're going to put this off to the side once again. Don't want to set that on top of the phone with a magnet sitting in there. That might cause loss of data. Let's get just a little touch of that red in here. And what this does now is it looks like there's maybe some mud up on the rocks too. Maybe even a little bit on this tree branch. It's super subtle. Not even sure if it's showing up on camera. Like so. Okay. Now we can even take a little touch of this. We talk about glazing all the time. Let's glaze back a little bit on this guy. So see what we're doing? This is a mud color just a second ago, and now it's sort of a skin tone again. I'm just going to wipe some of that away. See how it tints that just a touch? It's not so much about shading it darker, it's giving it a little different tint. And because it's sort of semi-translucent, now we've already starting to give that look that, well, he's probably dead. And he just fell to pieces. So he's dead. Okay, let's do the last little bit here. Now we've got our gray liner. Once again, we're going to do something similar to Shaggy himself, except in some places we can maybe even find a few more darks. See, look where the brush is being held way the heck back here. Just dragging this across. Dragging this across the surface. Now his fur texture is pretty solid. It's really nice. Sometimes with fur texture it can be a little dicey. You never quite know what you get. Alright, so let's take a little bit of this maiden flesh. And what we're going to do is we're going to go against the grain. So we got that brush spread out like a filbert. And we're sort of just dragging it this way. Going to do the same thing on the other side. We could flip them around. Flip them around and drag this brush across. So let's go a little more maiden flesh, like so. And what we're going to do next after this, we're going to talk about midtones. I know it sounds like some kind of a fancy art term. There's nothing real fancy about it. It's just, you got that huge range of values as far as light and dark go between the darkest dark and the lightest light. And all that stuff in between, just referred to as midtones. And there's this stuff right down the middle. That's kind of the most obvious midtone. But I don't know. You go, let's say 1 is your lightest color, 10 is your darkest. That range between 3 and 7, believe it or not, that's where all the action happens. Your darks should always have some kind of a color to them. So should your lights. But it's all that stuff in between. That's really actually what shows the shape of most of your miniature. And it's almost like those just get ignored for whatever reason. And it's all about the lights and the darks. Lights and darks are great. We worked really feverishly here to establish those lights and darks as quickly as possible. But you gotta have something in between, because otherwise you've got nothing but a contrast frenzy. You need something in between. And that's where we start to put some greens in here, some purples. I can still actually see some of the red from that initial shaded base coat that we just did. So what we will do is we'll let this sucker dry for just a little bit. And we'll get into some of those midtones again. Plus we're going to work on our poor dead dude here. Get a little more shape on him. So we'll be right back with some midtones next. We're going to get into those midtones that we were talking about, both on Shaggy Dog and on our, well, basically our fresh corpse right there. So we've got everything that we really need. As long as you have a red, a yellow, and a white, you can make skin tone. So let's do some of that right here. So I'm going to take some of that rust color. Now let's get a little bit of the yellow in there. A little more of the sepia liner. I'm going to actually use a little bit of the maggot white. What that does doesn't just lighten it up, but also grays it down a little bit. Let's throw a little more in there. You can see I have a whole little range of skin tones. Let's do the old skin tone test here. Yep, that's pretty close. You can barely see it on my hand. It's when you know you got some pretty decent skin tones, and it sure beats looking around for forever for a freaking jar of flesh tone when you can just make your own. And you can see now as soon as we start to drop this in here, remember how dark that seemed on the palette? Sure seems light here. Look how much liquid we've got in there. Here, I'm just going to make sure that there's no gunk right there on his head. So I'll try and give him some kind of a surprised look, I would think, with his eyes almost rolled back up into his head a little bit. Like I said, we're going to add some green to this here too. And essentially the stuff we've got out on the palette is going to be good enough for that. I know some folks, they're afraid to do the whole mixing thing because it seems complex and scary, but just think about it in just sort of a rational way. You think, okay, what's in skin? I mean, there's a lot of pinkishness in there, so that's clearly some red and some white, but it's not hot pink or whatever, so you got to dirty up that mix. That's where the yellow comes in. It warms it up a little bit, takes it off of pink. You could throw a little bit of brown in there to get it even darker. Heck, you could throw some green in there to make it a little more gray. Lots of options for skin tones and to get plenty of variety in that. So there's a couple of teeth right here while I'm thinking about it. I'm just gonna throw a little bit of that on there. I'm just gonna get some lighter color here on his eyes. They're gonna be green eventually, but we're just making that lighter for now. So like I said, we're just gonna get in here. Can't forget the movement tray. That's still got a body part on there too. Where are you at? There you are. I'll just throw some right here on that leg, and even here, I don't want to get too involved with the skin tones and such, because I'm going to do the blood effects and everything else. It's going to be smears of blood all over the place. Well, do I really have to get that detail? Now look at how relatively dark that skin tone is. Let's throw in a little more of the maggot white there. That, again, all it is just a little off-white, but tinted more towards the blue. And we can add a few more lights in here. We can do some greens in there. That'll give it that sort of, well, I guess you can say 5 o'clock shadow. And if it has also a greenish tinge to it, well then the blood effects look that much more interesting, because they'll be darker, really deep, rich red in all likelihood. So we'll just keep going here. I'm going to go back at a little more of the maggot white. We'll lighten this up once more. And like I was saying, the idea is here you sort of want to get a light pale flesh tone, because, well, there's not a whole lot of circulation going on right now. I think most of that's just kind of on the ground. Get this a little lighter. So once again, give it sort of a pale look to it. I had thought about grabbing maybe a shield. I actually had, well, unfortunately, the only shields I have sitting around are Stark shields. I didn't happen to have any extra, say, Lannister shields or whatever. I guess I could have just scratch built something out of plastic card, because all the Lannisters that I've got they're kind of being used. So I didn't have extra ones to pirate the parts off of. But that could be a fun thing too. Maybe eventually once I get some extra, because with Amazon sometimes does sales, especially on older boxes that are out. I think there was one point you could get boxes for something like $17 US during a recent Amazon sale. So I would suggest maybe that's where you say, you know what, okay, yeah, I'm playing Starks, but I want to have some dead Lannister bits there, but I don't necessarily want to be tearing apart a $30 box of stuff. Maybe wait a little while and take advantage of that sale where there's say 17. I've actually got a blog post. See that blog's address scrolling across the bottom of the screen there, that Wappelius blogspot.com. You can check out my Lord of the Rings stuff, well, also other GW stuff like 40K, and you'll see I had plenty of trophy stuff on bases. I know at one point I was taking Gondor heads and putting those on my Easterling cataphracts and on my chariots. So see, we've given that a little bit of a lighter look, but it's still a little bit grayish. Now here we're going to try and get some green. What makes green? Blue and yellow. Except this is not going to be the kind of green you're expecting. We're not making a Kelly green. We're making sort of an off grayish green here. And it's also mixing with the color that we've been using. So see, it doesn't really look green on the palette, but now it's certainly much more gray than the other colors that were there. Let's get a little here. So I'm going to go in with some of this red, that rusty color there. I'll get some of that on this tree branch. Does a couple of things. Few things. Darkens it up and it warms it up. Now, let's not forget about our wolf here. Now, I will need some new brown liner out on the palette because, well, what is black? Basically, you take blue, you take brown, you mix them together, you got yourself black. And that's what we're going to do here. We're going to take blue, we're going to take brown, mix them together, and we're going to mix ourselves a really, 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 really dark color. And for Shaggy, that's where we're going to do some of these. Now I'm looking at, see his ears actually have they're not dark on the inside, so I'm going to leave those alone, but I'm going to be shading around. Yeah, nose needs to be dark. Certainly needs to be dark. See, I'm just kind of going around the eyes here too. I'm also going to try and make a little bit of a glaze out of this here. I know we're talking about midtones, but sometimes you got to have dark to show light, and right now we're throwing in a little bit more of that dark. In a few places, a few strategic places here. Well, just looking at the reference now, I think the people that are real familiar with Song of Ice and Fire, they know that the imagery of the miniatures, it's not from the show, it's from the books, which means there's a difference. Like I'll grab, what's her name, Arya here. Where is she? Now she was definitely not looking like this on the show, not necessarily. But this is, in the books, particularly, this is how she's more portrayed. So, see how we've added now a little bit of difference here. I'm going to change my focus a little bit here. Just to make sure, because it changes with the color. When you start to add more shading, it's easier for it to focus on. When there's a little less, it's harder. What are we taking here? We got blue liner, some of that maggot white. What am I doing here? I'm going to go right in here And this is what we're talking about, some of those midtones. This will give it a little bit of a bluish tint, but we're not doing this absolutely everywhere. Otherwise, he would be a blue wolf, and we want him to be more of a black wolf. Generally, when you have dogs, wolves, whatever, that are black, the emphasis of the color, I'd say it tilts toward more warm colors, basically warm side. Sorry for the stutter there. It's been the long, long day of painting, that's for sure. We'll just keep going here. Add a little bit of this blue here and there, not everywhere, just in some places. Some folks, they wouldn't be comfortable using a big old brush like this. You don't have to. You can use a smaller one. Reason I do this, well, there's the 2D art training for sure, but also holds that much more paint. I don't have to keep going back and forth. I can just keep going, keep painting, not stop. And when you paint as many things as I do, or let's say you're just working on your armies, that can save you some time. That'll make a difference. It also makes a difference as far as not destroying those those really nice brushes there too. So let's do something different now. We're taking the brown liner and some maiden flesh. We're going to go the other way. Now we're going to go a little bit warmer with this. So once again, a mid-tone, but this time it's a warmer gray. It's a little bit more like what we had. But we've got that little touch of the bluishness underneath it. It makes that black. I can't quite do the air quotes right here. My hands are a little bit occupied. But that little bit of a difference, there's something for people to look at. It's not just, oh, look, they basically primed it black and they dry brushed some lighter gray over it and then maybe dipped it in some kind of Minwax or whatever, and that's it. Nothing quite wrong with that. Actually, I'm kind of wondering maybe now people will do more with the GW, not the Citadel, the contrast paints. I can see people trying to do that with some of their doggos. And we're adding a little bit of light now around those eyes. Just trying to peek over at my reference. There's usually stuff in the way. Now what I'll do in the next segment, that's when I'll do stuff like the gray, or not the gray, the green. I'll get some of the fluorescent paint out and we'll do some of that. You can see where none of this stuff is a highlight. This is all pretty dark right here. I guess that's the other key with black is, well, if your highlights are really bright, it's going to look less like black, more like gray-ish, something like that. Now the other wolf ghost that you saw early on with all the whites, there was a heavy emphasis on taking purple and green to make a black color, or a gray, a light gray. When you look at Ghost, you don't see the purple or the green until you get really close to it and really stare at it, and then you say, wait a second, there's a little something more going on here. Sure enough, that's where you start to notice there's something more than just, well, white or light gray. So see here as we add those little bit of highlights there, that just starts to change it around ever so slightly. Gives it a little more depth, and we can always go, like I said, always go back in there with some darker stuff too. Now I still got some of my skin tone here, and just looking at the way his ears are, looking at the reference, see if I can do that here. I know it might be a little bit in shadow there, but what that does to it, it tends to break up all of the black. Sometimes it can just be a little too black. Going back into my, basically my warm mid-tone gray. These guys, the way these have been sculpted, there's some seriously heavy texture of fur in the scruff. Now, it in some ways it presents some neat opportunities. You can do maybe a little more in the way of shading than you otherwise could have. But hopefully it's starting to come through. Now, okay, what I'll do is maybe I will just grab a smaller brush here so you can see. I just don't want everybody to think, well, gee, now I can't use my little brushes anymore. Well, so here's one of those, your Winsor Newtons right there, and see if we can get in here and start to go after these little, smaller doodads right here, these little smaller bits of fur. Nothing that says you can't use a smaller brush. I recommend starting out with the bigger brushes because you would be surprised at the wear and tear. If any other reason, just to make your expensive brushes get, good grief, what if you got 3, 4, 5 more years of use out of those? High quality use. Now that's money you can spend on more miniatures. Now, for those not familiar with my army painting tutorials, they're 5 episodes long, and in each one of those episodes, whether it's basing, whether it's more the initial base coat type effects or whatever, no matter what it is, I always keep track of, well, how much time did that take? So let's say I want to do something like pyromancers with all the object source lighting stuff that I like to do. Well, I'll usually do a color test figure. That's the second episode in every series. As I add a few more lights here, just to try and make the face have a little bit of, just a little touch of interest here. I'll keep track of how long that takes, and I'll say, oh man, okay, that's going to add potentially 20 minutes to every figure, half hour to every figure. Well, there's 12 of them. Am I willing to invest that kind of time? The basing stuff. Well, yeah, that really looks neat, that type of basing, but it takes 3 times as long as if I did it just this other way. It's better to decide sooner rather than later. Like this. Okay, obviously basing Shaggy Dog like this was way longer. I'm gonna actually throw a little bit of maiden, or the maggot white, a little darker, or the off-white bluish tone for back here. Geez, it took me, well, I want to say maybe 40 minutes-ish, maybe a little more to do the whole effect, plus the movement tray. Now, if I did it a bunch of times, it'd probably take a little less time. Is that something that you can, is that a time frame you can live with? Spending 45 minutes doing this extra stuff on your dog when you could, in theory, just add rocks and gravel and then cover it up with a bunch of snow. Because remember, we got to paint torso on here. We got to add the blood effects. We're going to be adding icicles. That's an awful lot of stuff to add on a 0-point unit. However, it's going to be, you don't have that many of these. There's only 4 of the wolves, period, right now. So is it really that much of a sacrifice to spend maybe an extra hour and a half to go all out on a full blast base? So I know that sounds like kind of an aside there, but it's the reason why these tutorials are not speed ramped and voiceovered and 5 minutes long. because I'm also trying to work in this kind of discussion, because I don't know how many times, but I have an awful lot of figures in my house that were bequeathed to me because people just didn't think they could ever finish their army project, and they said, I don't want to look at this anymore. You take it. Here, just I don't want to see these anymore. Well, that's great for me, not so great for them. So see how we've really got worked in some of those different colors in there, different lights. Now one last little thing here. I'm gonna go in here now and maybe even go a little more green. And what I'll do is I'm actually going to throw out, this is just a little bit of golden yellow right here. Yep, it's actually golden yellow. So I just want to be able to get a touch more green into this. So I'm just going to throw it over here. So there's some of that yellow. So now we got some green. It just wasn't enough green that I'm looking for. So I'll mix that a little bit of the sepia liner there. Even a touch of the brown liner. That's what I'm looking for. There's a couple places I want to put this. Probably on the base here a little bit. Once again, not going to get too wrapped up in the rock because a lot of snow is going to be covering that. But I want to get some, I'm going to mix it with a little bit of that flesh tone. And we'll just, we're going to throw some of this right in here. Give him a little bit of a, like I said, a little bit of 5 o'clock shadow. So we got that pretty well set. Okay, now I'm gonna take a little bit of the maggot white, some of that yellow, and I'm going to get a nice little bright thing going in the eye there because I want my green, my fluorescent green to go over that. There we go. Makes that a little bit lighter. Let's hit some of our spinal column there and it's her eyes. Speaking of eyes, I'm going to take some of my brown liner here. I'll see if we can't give this guy a rather perturbed look on his face. Thing with eyes, it's easier just to paint this dark area. It's not just the eyebrow, but it's also under the eye. See, we'll just have him looking up this way. Like, holy smokes, what just happened to me? And now we'll take, it's easier just to do this after the fact. So what we're going to do is separate the eye from the eyebrow right now. I'm going to go right in here. Now we get some separation there. It's so much easier than actually trying to paint that stupid eyebrow in there. Bam, another one. So he's got a little bit of a look on his face. I actually take some of that. I'm going to put a few of those in here. Now who knows, maybe with your Shaggy Dog, you're going to cover up that muzzle with a whole bunch of fresh blood and stuff. Maybe have some blood drooling down. You can do anything you want. Now I do have a little bit of a tongue here. I'm just going to throw that red there just to indicate a little reminder for me to do in the next segment that we'll get to. So we're going to get some of that fluorescent green out on the palette. I'll do a little more dark shading in some places. We'll finalize anything we got to do on our skin tones. And then what we'll do is, last segment's going to be all about snow and blood effects after that. So we'll be right back with our fluorescent green eyes and some other fun stuff like that. So to get some really nice intense green glow out of those eyes, we got our fluorescent green. Now I've used this a ton of times on other stuff. I've actually used it here on my pyromancers to get that really intense glow of the, I think it's called balefire, right? I think this one will show it too. And this is another series of tutorials that I'm doing on actually one is already up for the patrons. See, I got some freehand on there. You see how that makes that nice and intense, just a really, the camera can't even catch it. The camera has a hard time. That's how intense that glow is. Now there is not a whole bunch here, but we're going to try some anyway. Now what I will do is I'm going to actually get some, this is just some regular white out here. And we're going to, let's get our little picture of our Shaggy Dog. See, we're just going to try and get some of that greenish glow there. Like I said, you don't need a ton of it. What really, I guess, messes people up about this, and like I said, for those of you that have already seen the Pyromancer tutorial on the Patreon page, you already know this. But when it comes to the fluorescent paints, they're really, really thick, but they are really, really translucent. That's what gives them that fluorescent property. So we're going to get into his eyes here. Just like that. And that's the other thing, is you can see how thick that is. Look at how thick that I got to take some of that away just to be able to get this on the eye. So it's not always the easiest thing to control. Now I'm just going to let that sit there. What we are going to do, take some of that red that I added, and this is just more of a regular, it's just clear red. It's a typical red. We're going to see if we can't get a little bit of action here on his tongue. I'm not really going to sweat it too much because this is also another place we want to do those blood effects, right? We want to have it look like he's got tons of fresh blood oozing out of his lips there. So why bother painting it very intensely, all of this stuff? Let's just indicate it a little bit here. So we're going to do a little dot over there, a little dot over there, kind of get the side of the tongue. And while I've got this little bit of a pink here, I'm going to throw some of it on this torso. Because he hasn't been laying here for weeks. He's only supposed to just be kind of a fresh kill. So let's get a little bit of pink on the nose here. But also on the other hand, I've got my green out here. Means that I can also, I still got some of that left. Some of that rust color there. So I want to have a couple of different tones available. This is going to be right there and the chin. I just turned that over and I saw there was no paint down in there. Well, there was paint, but not any kind of real shading. So just wanted to work that down there. I also had to think, well, there is going to be snow here, so, and it's going to be piled up around this. So we're just adding a little bit of that pinkish color there. Get a touch of it into the hand. These are things you can just not bother with if you don't want to. You could just leave the skin tone the way we've already done it and say, hey, that's good enough. For me, I just wanted to get a little bit more in there. I mean, I got the color sitting out here anyway. Might as well use it. All right. And like I said, it's just a little bit. I'm going to add a touch of white to that, make it even a little bit lighter in some places because we really want that to be some pale skin tone. At a certain point, the camera doesn't necessarily catch it. It's sort of a compromise. You either get some of the dark or you get some of the light. It's the nature of the beast when you're filming stuff. I'm going to go back to this again. And we'll get some of the right here. And remember, One other reason I want this to be somewhat lighter is that the blood effects they'll show up that much more if we have enough light to work with. And that's why the eyes here on the dog show up pretty nice, because we worked to make sure there was a lot of dark around them. Just putting a few lighter highlights in some places. Now, I've been looking at the picture here, and I can't quite tell if it's got the little eyes. Now, let's look at Ghost, because I gave him, or her, probably him. Yep, so you can see there's actually an expression on the eyes there. So let's do the same here. We'll just keep it consistent. So I got some brown and blue liner. Just going to make something that's dark. Nice thing about the liner paints is you can thin those down, but they don't lose their intensity. They're still nice and dark. So here we go. We're going to try to give them a nice set of eyes here. So one right there. As he's looking at you now. I'm going to turn this upside down. It helps me to match where he's looking. And I think we successfully did that. He's like, yeah, come on, get over here. I'll get you. So that worked out pretty well, and I'm just going to add now a few more darks in some places here. Couple more here. Now we mentioned purple. What the heck? Just throw this in there real quick, just as a little bit of an example. So we're just gonna take some of the old clear purple out here again. None of these colors are clear. They're just a name that they gave them, which is kind of an unfortunate name. And let's make that a little darker. So now we've got ourselves. I'm gonna throw a little of the blue liner in there, so we've got sort of a purple gray now. It's just one other little bit we can add in our midtones here that absolutely no one's going to look at this and go, wait, there's purple on there. They're just going to say, wow, that looks really neat. There's a lot going on in those shadows. I don't know what it is, but there's something neat. I like looking at it. It's the fact that you've just gone that little extra bit. I mean, how hard is this? We're not adding an extra 40 minutes to the whole process. We're 4 or 5 minutes of just adding a little bit of this purple there to some areas. That's all it is. We're not going crazy with it, and it's a really dark purple. And I'm even going to use it on some parts of the skin tone here. See, a little bit like that. Then I can even lighten it up a touch. And maybe that little bit of purple skin tone, maybe that starts to indicate that, well, if he's not quite dead already, well, he is soon to be expirated. He is gone. So let's throw a little more. Yeah, see that? Right in there. Look what that just did. That's my favorite. Oh, I absolutely love doing that, especially when you got kind of more of a corpse type thing that you're working on. I'm going to make sure that I get some of this on the leg there too. I can't forget that. So see, it just, I'll even put a little bit of that on the rocks there. Was that not super hard, not real intense, but for what it adds, to me, it's worth it. I try not to do something where I'm saying, here's a rule, here's another rule, here's another rule. You got to do this, you got to do that. I'm really more interested in options for you. Well, here, you could try this. You could try adding this. You don't have to. just trying to give you some things that maybe you try once. If you don't like them, you don't have to try them anymore, but sometimes just trying it once. Yeah, a little bit of purple right there. It's not really going to register as purple, but boy, people will know. They'll know you did something there. That it's not, again, just a little bit of a dry brush and then dipped in something. They know that you've taken a little extra time, So I'm going to say we're essentially good to go. Next thing we'll do is there's snow. And then we'll finish that off with some blood effects. So how's that sound? That should be really cool. You think so? We're going to add our snow and ice effect. And we're going to start off with the snow. The snow, we're going to use this little method here. It's from Secret Weapon. You got these two materials. You got your crushed glass here, realistic water here. Now, you notice on the container it says, it says do not shake. What's your first instinct when you grab a bottle of anything? You grab it, you shake the heck out of it. Well, it says in little letters there, do not shake, and, well, decided to put these bigger letters on there to remind us. Now, that's one part of this. This is the other part. Now, you'll also notice here, that is actual crushed glass. That's why I still have my glove on here. It's also why I've got this little, it's just the lid of a butter container. There's a lot of neat things. So this can actually catch some of the stuff that, you don't want this stuff just rolling around, because those little tiny glass beads, they will actually just roll around. You just don't want that stuff all over the place. You don't want to blow on this stuff either, because now you've got glass pieces flying around through the air. So this is just a little bit of a safety thing right here. It also makes it show up a little bit easier. So that's how I'm trying to get it where the palette camera is. So you can see that now. This is what makes the snow going to be a little bit wetter. So you want melted snow. The more of this you got in there, the more melted your snow is going to be. The more of this you got in here, the more crystalline your snow is going to be. And we'll break out a few of the figures again so you can see what we're talking about. So you can see those little, yeah, let me see if I hide some of the lights. You can see some of those glistening thing, the little that is the crushed glass. Nothing quite does it like that. And you can see we've got some snow that's over melted in some places. And I think I also have, this is good. This is another example of what we're going to be doing. So this is one of the conscripts. That's also, it's the alternate special sculpt. But see those icicles hanging off of that tree? That is the whole reason I put that tree branch on there, because that adds, it just adds so much to it. Now, do we want some tufts of grass on this thing? You know what? I'm not gonna go with any tufts of grass. I say we got enough rocky stuff here. We're just gonna go straight up snow. Yeah, because I also have to think, okay, so this overhangs in a few places. It's just not worth it. So we're going to go with snow. And we're going to separate these two. This is the other reason why I want this container. So we're going over here with our not shaking the thing, right? Put out about that much, because I don't want to say it dries real fast, but this has a finite working time. Now, see all our little grass, see how that just moves around? I'm going to put that all the way over here. All the way. Look at all those little tiny glass crystals. I'm going to throw in more. There we go. Always, I learned the hard way, keep the stupid lid closed. It just saves you a lot of grief. Now I have some clean water off to the side. You can't see. Just doing that because you're going to want to clean out your brush. Now all I'm going to do is move this over here, make this bigger. It's the magic of having a couple of different cameras and XSplit. And what we're going to do is we're going to take some of this, move it over into here. So as good you can see, just pushing this over and dividing this up here. I would say it's best to start off, if you're going to do more melted snow, start off with the more melted snow first. So we're going to have some of this start to wander over in here, and you can see, look what starts to happen. See it? Now this is going to be the more crystalline type snow, but when you start to add a little more of that water effects in there. But if you stop just shy of making these things totally soaked, see you've got a little, almost like a little pile of snow there. I'm going to do is set this off to the side. It's best to have a couple of brushes when you're doing this. So what I'm going to do is try and grab some of this. Sometimes it can be a little bit difficult. Maybe you need a second brush. Just to pile that on there. There we go. I'm going to start back here. Right there. Now I'm going to make this camera smaller. Now what we're going to do is I'm going to press this down. Like I said, you have some time to work with it. You don't have forever. It will harden. That's why we start out with a little bit at a time. And you can see how that gets a little bit translucent. Even now, that's just the magic of this stuff. And it is unbelievable what it can do. So we're going to just throw a little more out here. And I had to decide how much of my original rock texture do I want to cover up with snow. You're going to have to decide the same thing yourself. So here we're going to continue that snow pile. We don't want it to just end right where the dog's feet are. And we got our last blob that we're going to throw right over here. Now, what happens is, because the water effects is shiny, whatever this hits is going to have a little shininess to it. Let's say it's something you didn't want. Well, you could either paint over it, or you take, I always have brush on, is it the Army Painter brush on dull coat? I love that stuff because you can brush it on into a very specific area. Now I'm going to start to get my snow out here too. And we're just, see how it's a little more melted right there? But now we're going to make ourselves some new snow. You can see I've had these two separated. And I only make the snow when I'm just about to use it. Here, I'm going to move a little more of this. Eventually, there is no formula to this. I can't say put 10% of this and 5% of that. It's all about feel. Because sometimes you just have to do things yourself and kind of figure them out on your own. So here what we're doing is trying to pile this up. I think you'll be able to see what I'm trying to do here. Piling this up. So look at how that overhangs right there. Because wouldn't it be cool to have maybe an icicle at the end of that? That could be very, very cool. Now, for sure, I want to try and get some snow in there. It means I need a little smaller brush here to push this around. And I would advise probably not using your really expensive brushes for that part of the process. These are actually just really cheap versions of basically the same craft brush you just saw. So I'm going to push a little more of this here. And I can actually quite literally squeeze some snow out of this brush. And right here. I knew all the while that I wanted to have a pile of snow here. So that's why he was raised. It's almost like his head was resting on a pillow or something like that. The whole point behind that is because I knew this was coming. So what I am going to do here, this is kind of an ideal mix. And what I'm going to try and do is get some piles of this snow to catch on the end of my branches, because I can't really have icicles without some snow piled up on the branches here. And this can be a little bit of a process. Sometimes it takes a little while for the snow to hook on there. Now, the wetter it is, so here we'll add a little more of the water effects, the easier it's going to stick. See how much easier that stuck? So, something to consider. And this is where I say you just got to get a feel for it and learn how it works. I can show you here. This, like I said, this is more about giving you the idea of using it, because I'd certainly never heard of it before until I said, oh look, they've got this. That could be fun. So here we're just piling up that snow on the branch. We can even, here we'll do a little bit of this. I'm going to get some more of my crushed glass back in here. And this is something that's fun to do, because when I walk to the store, I end up completely covering. That's like a 2-block walk in a snow, not even a heavy snowstorm, a decent snowstorm. I look like the freaking abominable snowman. I'm just covered in snow. So I'm just going to put this here on his scruff. And like I said, it's a little bit on the crystalline side there. I'm going to put out some more crushed glass like that. Going to get even a little more. And you see how it's a little more puffy here? Because I actually wanted it to be a little more puffy. Our dog also had a big scruff like this, and in the snow, oh my gosh, it'd just be this pile of snow chunks all over his back. You'd actually have to make sure you shook him off before he went in the house, because there was that much snow piled up on his back. So see, now he has a little bit more of an icy look there. So I can actually turn down my brightness a touch. I had it turned up. So let's add a few more bits of snow to our main base here, and then we'll shift over to our movement tray. All right. Here we go. And we need definitely some more over here. This stuff, once you get a handle on it, it can be really fun to work with. So what I did on any Lannister type things, the snow was more melted, sort of as if the snow has now started to work its way further and further south. Oh, let's go one more touch here. See how nice, and this is the other thing too, is that our wolf looks that much darker, even though he's got the same grays. We haven't changed the lightness of it, but we've added lightness around him, all this snow. So he's bound to look a little bit lighter. So you can see we're just continuing to mix this stuff in. And I think this will be the last batch for the main base, and then we'll go to the movement tray. See how that just kind of creates a little bit of a, look at that. But it's got a texture to it. It's not just as neat as it is to have the crystal type stuff. There's also a texture to it, and that is just so fantastic. So here we'll keep working our way around the base here. Just adding some more snow where we think we need it. I don't necessarily want to go crazy with the snow. We want to have some rock still. But I am going to finish that up. So now it sort of sets the body in place. It looks like it, instead of just riding on top of the rocks, now it's sort of sitting down into the snow. And I think we got a decent amount of snow piled up on our, yeah, because I think Night's Watch can still have. I know it's a Stark thing, but well, no, maybe it is just. Yeah, it's just a Stark thing. I don't know if you can combine it with I will see. I haven't actually had a chance to really look closely at the car. I've seen the battle reports because people are already using these guys. I think that's just going to be the trend that people start to show units that have been semi-leaked. Alright, so there we go. See, we got our snow piled up on his back over there. Now, let's shift to our main base, but I've got to be careful. Got to be real careful here to see where is this going to overlap. Now, this, I cannot have a big pile of snow in here. That's why I didn't do the grass stuff. Also back here, there's overlap. So I'm going to focus in actually just a few areas with stuff like the snow. I'm going to go in here. I'm going to get rid of some of... So you can use, like I said, water. Once the stuff hardens in there, you're best off using rubbing alcohol. That's how I clean my brushes all the time anyways. So it's time to make some snow. Looks like I need a little more of my realistic water in there. Boom. If I add too much, I can always throw some more of the crushed glass in there. So I really like the idea of having these containers because all I got to do now is just chuck this thing in the garbage. So let's do ourselves a little bit of snow piled up here. I'm just going to put that there. Back to my small brush. Let's move this around, manipulate it a little bit. Once again, it's going to look like this is part of the snow rather than just randomly laying on top of some rocks. So we got that. Now I'm going to squeegee out some more snow from my big brush here. And we'll put this on the other side. All the while, though, trying to make sure that I leave enough room for that base to get down in there. Because believe me, I've forgotten that at times and, well, regretted it. See now the foot, it just looks like it's resting on something. There. Because if we want to have blood-soaked snow, we got to have snow to begin with. Speaking of snow, we're going to get some more over here. It's okay to have some hang over the edge of the base, but when you get to this part of where the base meets the movement tray, it's a better idea to just give it a little bit of distance. So I'm going to put a little bit over here. This is going to be somewhat more melted because that way I can reduce the profile of it there. See? Knock it down. It's not so high. I'm going to do this. Touch more over here. And then I've got to add just a few more rounds of it here. So it looks like I got some water effects out there. So we're just going to get the snow going right into that. And this is the last of our snow. And then what you do, you don't have to let it dry for a long time, but I will let this stuff cure for a little bit. And then we'll add that blood in there. And it's pretty simple. None of this is really, look at this. How hard is this? Not that hard. It's not really that long either to add all this stuff in here. But it's well worth it to me. And the other thing too is that I know people have asked, is the snow yellow? Geez, I've had this stuff for years on miniatures and haven't had to worry about that whatsoever. Not at all. No need to worry about the snow yellowing over time. And glass just doesn't yellow. And the water effects are pretty much designed not to yellow at all because, well, they wouldn't really be water effects. So I'm just going to pile up a little more here. I think I might try to get just a touch more over here. Now you know I didn't get too crazy about the ground because well, I knew that I was probably going to have this amount of coverage with the snow. And look at how much I was able to sort of squeegee out of the brush there. And now I'm going to do another one of these little snow piles here. Another trick you can do, I don't need to do it here because it's not what I'm looking to do, but you could, in theory, dump a little bit of the just the straight up crushed glass onto this while it's still wet. That makes kind of a neat effect too. I'll tell you that. I've tried it. Now I know I did it on for my winter Soviets. I did a whole bunch of different snow techniques. I actually mixed this with Woodland Scenics, just snow flock, and that actually made a really neat effect. I liked it. I wasn't sure if I would like it or hate it. So here we're doing that same thing where we sort of pillow the snow over the edge, just like we did on the main base, so that we have a little repetition there. All right, and now what I'm going to do is just a few, because we don't necessarily want it just to be, okay, there's these scattered piles of snow. We're trying to have the snow be everywhere, but yet not completely cover the base. So look at how the warmth there in that leg, and a little bit of purple in there just helps make that show. And now what we will do is, like I said, we're going to get out the materials for our blood effects. And then we're going to get ourselves some nice blood-stained, blood-soaked snow. So we'll be right back with that. So while we continue to wait for the snow to dry, we're going to do our blood effects like we've done here. So you can see this is our Free Folk Raiders, and you can see how we've blended the snow and the ice together with the blood and the movement tray. Kind of combined everything. So look at how that blood spatter, see how that carries over into the movement tray. That's the key thing that we also want to do here. Everything is the same. Obviously I added some of the grass tufts here. Same crushed glass technique. Now this is a basing technique that I'm going to be showing you this on the cave dwellers, but it's also been part of my tutorial series, like I said, for the Winter Russians, doing all the different snow effects. So this is our Free Folk Raiders. These guys were done actually in oils, so I'm going to be doing some more tutorials like this. So these guys in oils, you can see all the nice different color variations here. But what I want to do is get those icicles. I had to let the snow dry a little bit more before I could do those, and actually just dropping on a few icicles to let it dry a little bit more. So I've got another unit here. This is also another upcoming tutorial series. So we've got our flayed men here. So basically my flayed men, all of the Boltons are going to have that same sort of blood effect there. Again, these guys are also magnetized. I think I'm going to do maybe a separate video about magnetizing things. The icicle effect that you saw, fairly basic stuff. The super heavy gel from Liquitex. This does amazing, so many different things. You can make water with this. Fantastic waves and water effects, splashing water. I'm thinking maybe a certain fish unit maybe get some splashing water. Who could those be? It also lets you sculpt fire. And remember those pyromancers? Let me see if I can get these guys out of the tray. And this is actually a tutorial I did for the patrons. So you can see there's all these fire effects that I've added here. See, there's some fire right there in the middle of the tray. That is actually that same gloss gel. Water, fire, icicles. I've used it to sculpt hair. So like on the giants where there's a seam, right where there should be a hairline or something, or a mold line, just drop some of this stuff over, and you can see how easy it is to sculpt. So what we're going to do is we're going to get our movement tray off to the side, out of harm's way. We're going to go back to our another little one of these containers. So this looks like it's all sort of milky white, and it sort of is until it dries, and then it dries completely clear. And I'll bring out my other figures that have got the ice on it just to show you as a little bit of a reminder here. Where are you? So here's one that also has some icicles. Here, what I'm also going to do is zoom this in. I'll zoom in once more, give it some focus. See, look at that. Look at how clear those dried. It can be, I guess when you haven't already done it, it can be a little fiddly at first. But there's nothing like having, look at that. Is that pretty? That is just neat. It's not super, and it's actually really tough as far as durable. So we got our little, look at how this, and you can see why it's easy to sculpt fire out of this here. Let me get this up higher. You can see how you can make fire. And this is another reason I use this red thing, because then you can see the stuff here. Otherwise you wouldn't really be able to see it. So this is reasonably hardened because there wasn't a lot of it. And see how I've got that, here, I'll hold it against dark. See I've got that little tendril like that. You try and basically hook one of those on there. Now you also have to have your water nearby because it's going to take a combination of, see, I'm trying to almost mold this into something that I can stretch out. You almost kind of have to drag this and pull it. I'm just going to try to make sure I got it on camera for you. So the first thing you sort of have to do is just get a globule. That's a highly technical term there. Wherever you want your icicle to start out. And see, now we've got a good possibility for one right there. Sometimes you can just take your hand, pull it down, and then see, you just drag it like that. Sometimes it's a building process. You have to sort of build the structure of it first. Here, let's get ourselves just a, again, we're looking to just plop a little globule on there and something that we can then pull down and sculpt. See that one? Now you can see it. You have a decent amount of working time with this stuff, so you don't have to rush, that's for sure. Don't have to rush whatsoever. Now the bigger this is, in some ways the bigger the icicle you can make. Now I've thrown some water on the brush, and what happens is it doesn't stick quite as much to my icicle. And see how I'm just trying to pull this down more and more. So we got to look at that. That's some nice big old icicles there. Now it's going to be a little tricky because I'm going to have to remember these are here. Because if we're going to do the blood effects after this, I got to make sure. If you hear a loud sound, that's me slamming into my icicles and basically wiping them out. It can happen. That one nifty one that I just showed you with all the icicles, I wiped out several of them and put them back in. So like I said, you don't have to do any of this. You don't have to add icicles. You don't have to do the whole blood effect thing if that's not what you're needing. But all I can say is that it's really nifty when you do. And I'm just pulling this down. And what happens is this stuff does reach a point where it's semi-cured and even just slightly cured or dried, however you want to term it. Then it's actually that much easier to add. See how I'm taking some water to this now? Here, let me move that up further. Good, you can see that. Now, this super watery stuff, this is what you can add to the ends of the icicles. Once they start to harden, you just add them to the end, and it really does actually just look like a natural icicle, because what is an icicle? It's water dripping down over and over again in the same place. They usually don't have a very pointy bottom to them. Now you notice I'm not getting too long with this here because I know there's a rock that probably goes right there. So when you're doing your tree branches, if you want ice on them, think ahead. Think, well, there might be a big old blob of snow here, or this is the end of the movement tray. They may be contacting another unit here. So what we'll do is we'll just leave that as it is, and then we're going to add some blood, and then we can come back to this and actually then add some more safely icicles and such to our tree. But first, let's do those blood effects. And what we're going to use, there's a bunch of different things. Okay, here's our 3 things that we'll use. So this is Ghost Tint right here. This is from Badger. It's Badger Airbrush, the same folks that make the Stino Res Primer. This is from Green Stuff World. You see me use a ton of their products. And then we got some red liner. I'm going to put all 3 of these out. I'm going to get that brush over there because otherwise I'm going to end up with some pink icicles. So there's some red liner out there. Now the reason with the ghost tints, this fresh blood, I mean it really, when it's out there, it's glossy, very glossy. And now this is some of the Green Stuff World. So you can see how there's a lightness to it. So we got basically 3 light, middle tone, dark. Because blood is not one uniform. It's usually where there's a little less of it, or the pool is thinner, it's lighter. The more coagulated, the thicker the pool, the heavier, the more dark it's going to be. And I'm going to start off actually with some of this. Throw a little red liner in there. This is actually for the wolf's mouth, this darker mix. Remember, we want to do that. So we got his face there. I'm just going to make sure I got a focus for you. There we go. And just throw that in there so you can see it's transparent. But you can also see it's got some glossiness to it. And now you know I didn't fret too much about getting all kinds of shading and stuff in his mouth because I knew there was going to be that. Now, we talked about this lighter blood here. We're going to take some of the Green Stuff World effects. And first, we're going to throw it over right here and see how that's lighter. Also using a bit of a light touch. It's also got a little bit of oranginess to it. That's why I have my red liner there too to cool it down a touch. So we're doing the same thing over here. And what we'll do is we can have it also then be darker, more coagulated. But we're just trying to let that soak in to our snow. This is really cool. I haven't actually tried something like this before to this degree ever, so to me this is a whole lot of fun. Now see, I can even have some blood drips here, but we'll do those. We'll reinforce those with the darker stuff too. Remember, this is just the initial layer here. So I'll have some blood there. We'll have some starting to wander down here, like so. Yeah, this is fine. I've been waiting to do this for quite, well, not quite a while, long enough, because I've had this set up for a few weeks, just waiting to be able to do this tutorial. So I'm going to set that aside now, because remember we also have our movement tray here. And guess what? We need some blood here too. Actually have it leak down onto the ground. But see how that it has a dimensional effect there? Look at how it's sinking down into the snow. You just can't beat that. That's just wow. Now I'll just do again some more. A few more blood dots there, and now let's try and see if we can't start to get this a little bit darker. There we are. See how it has a little glisteniness to it? I'm gonna try and there. Now let's set this aside, let that settle for a little bit. And now we're going to start to take some of the red liner, mix that in. And what I'm hoping that this does is give us a bit of a darker look to our blood. And we're going to start to add some of that in here. Go over here with it. So you see I've got a few different, look how it just soaks into the snow. Just soaks right in there. But we have some differential now in the lightness and darkness of our blood effects. I'm going to do that here so you can see where there's, well, maybe some fresh blood flow like out of the ripped off arm. It's a little darker, but further away it gets a little bit lighter. But I don't want to, it's so easy to just annihilate the snow altogether. You don't want to do that either. Let's see if I can't get some blood spatter, not necessarily spatter, but just some drops. Some isolated stuff here. And now as we work our way down into here, this is really starting to soak into there. And this is another big one right here. And you can see I've almost made it a bead of it. Now look at that. See how that's much darker there? Maybe if I go this, I'm just trying to avoid going this way because I'm trying to avoid my still drying icicles. Now let's see if we can't make this a little smaller here. I'm trying to make those little blood drops out of Shaggy Dog's mouth. Now I could even use this maybe a smaller brush for that. I might even go a little bit more with the red liner. Ah, there we are. Just, yeah. And you can see I'm trying to hit that, the dark part of the dot, inside where the lighter blood is. Just do a few more of those there, like just like anything else, sometimes less is more. And the other thing is the enemy of good is always better. Sometimes you're just better off leaving it as it is. And this is where I didn't get too crazy with painting in all the flesh tones there because I knew there was going to be some stuff that would cover that. Let's see if I can't get a, yeah, just a few sort of dots of the blood there. Like I said, if you can snag these things from Secret Weapon. They certainly make interesting, real interesting thing like that. Now, like I said, I'm going to get me some extra Lannisters, extra Starks, and there are going to be some. Well, you'll be seeing this on corpse piles because I'll be doing, well, the first one will probably be for the patrons, I guess, but I've got the 3D terrain, the corpse piles. So you can bet I'm going to be doing this effect on those corpse piles. Now, the glossiness that you see here pretty much stays intact. Alright, let's just throw a few more. Little blood right there. Like I said, I don't want to kill it all, so let's set that off to the side now. Yeah, look what we got there. That is just nifty. Let's see if we can't do one last little, yeah, of the darker stuff there. Because it is semi-coagulated, I suppose you could say. Look at how that just sort of sinks down into the snow. Oh yeah. Really liking that. That's very fun. Now, with my other brush that does not have a bunch of red stuff in it, let's see if we can't add to our icicles here. And I can already see that they're hardening up a little bit. And I think you can see maybe there, right there, you can definitely see it. So what you do is just every few minutes, you can weave back around again and add another little dot to the end of your icicle. Let's see if I can maybe build one more. Yeah, see that only moved a little bit, so that means that I could, if I wanted to, I think try and extend that a little bit. There we go. And sometimes it's a little bit of adding and then tearing down. There we go. And icicles are also not perfect. I've seen some really weird shaped icicles. They can be affected by the wind, so they're not necessarily something that's just, going to be dropped straight down. I looked at icicles and go, what in the world happened there? Now, the more water that you put in there, the more like a drop it's going to be. And the drier it is, the more it's going to just pull. So what we're going to do is we'll call that, I'm going to call this completed here. We won't mess around with it anymore. So we've got, like I said, we got icicles there. There's some really nifty blood effects. Blood soaking in there. We got Shaggy Dog with snow on him and glowing green eyes. We got lots of fun stuff. And what I'll do is, once again, that blog address that you see scrolling along the bottom of the screen, that's where you can find a lot of the nice finished images of this. So much better than just trying to toss them in here, making the video that much longer. So I want to say thanks to all the patrons who support me every month. I appreciate that. And for folks that might be interested in this, I'm doing obviously tons of Song of Ice and Fire. I'm doing every single army, every single unit. And usually before they come out, so I try and have these tutorials ready for you in advance, so you maybe get some ideas for yourself. Also going to be doing battle reports. So there's the address of the Patreon page. The $15 army painter, that gets you everything. You see the army painting tutorials special maybe blood effects and snow videos like this, terrain stuff. You get to see all the nifty stuff. So if you want to support me there, I'd appreciate it. And if anything else, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and then you would get to see when I'm doing a live session maybe, or you just get notifications when new videos like this are added to the page. So thanks again for watching, and I hope this taught you some really useful, fun things. Thanks a lot.